Hi, this is mystery writer Julie Cooper welcoming you to our podcast series. I'm half of the duo bringing you Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. We have a very special guest with us today, but before Wendy introduces her, I want to give a special thank you to my brother Chris Squires for our wonderful intro and exit music, his original composition and performance of The Man in the Panama Hat. Over to you, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Kendall, a writer, reader, and mystery lover. I like all the stories along the mystery spectrum, but especially cozies. And recently, I've been wondering, when it comes to mysteries and cozy series in particular, are the readers there because they like solving puzzles or because of their interest in and attachment to the characters? After all, it's a great way to explore the human condition. There's nothing like a crime to see how characters act with increased conflict and tension. Characters at odds and in trouble make for great storytelling. But then again, aren't mystery readers interested primarily in solving the mystery before the answers are again revealed? Our guest today is Leslie Budewitz. Leslie, can you please make sure that I pronounced your last name correctly?
You know, my father had 3 brothers, and they all said our last name differently, so I'm okay with variations.
Okay.
Leslie is the first author to win Agatha Awards for both fiction and nonfiction. She writes 2 delectable cozy mystery series, The Spice Shop Mysteries and the Food Lovers Village Mysteries. And it was the first in that series, Death al Dente, that earned the Best First Novel Award in 2013. Leslie graduated from Seattle University and Notre Dame Law School, and it was her guide for writers titled Books, Crooks, and Counselors, How to Write Accurately About Law and Courtroom Procedure, that earned the award for Best Nonfiction in 2011. She's been the president of the National Sisters in Crime organization and helped co-found their Guppies group for new and unpublished writers. Oh my gosh, welcome, Leslie.
Welcome.
Thank you, Wendy and Julie. It's always a treat to talk mysteries with writers and readers.
Leslie, I'm going to dive right into it. What do you think attracts mystery readers? And what do you think keeps them coming back to your series? Is it the intriguing and fun characters that you write, or is it the puzzles?
That's a really good question, and I don't think that there is any one answer. Some readers really love the puzzle, and many of those readers are attracted to cozies, which are sometimes described as the descendants of Agatha Christie, for that reason. In the Golden Age, the 1930s, we had writers who focused primarily on the puzzle, Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, now Marsh, and a few others. And gradually, the character began to become more important. Certainly in each of those series that by the Golden Age authors that I mentioned, we know and remember their main characters. But in the modern world, the mystery reader is sometimes, I think, more interested in the development of the characters than in the stories themselves. It's not uncommon to hear readers say, for example, that they feel like they know Armand Gamache, the main character in Louise Penny's series, and that they could have a conversation with him, or that Deborah Knott, the main character in Margaret Maron's Southern Bootlegger series, seems like a younger sister to them, and that they feel a relationship with the characters. So I think that for the modern reader, it's a little bit of both, which is, of course, a challenge for us as a writer. We have to make sure that our books are as strong as they can be on every level: the plot, the characters, the setting, and the language itself.
Well, I think you certainly do that in your books. I mean, I just love the characters, but then I also like solving the mysteries, or at least trying to before before the end of the book. And I really like your website tab, Killer Characters, where it's fun to read your characters that are writing to us online about current events. Do your characters always act as you expect, or do they sometimes surprise you? And I just want to say, too, I really encourage our listeners to check out your website. It's got so much fun information on it.
Well, thanks. My personal website is lesliebudewitz.com. And the group blog that you mentioned, Killer Characters, is killercharacters.com, where the cozy characters do the talking. There are, I think, about 24 writers, all of us in this lighthearted vein, what we call the cozy, who each have a day of the month when our characters take the stage, and it's a lot of fun. You asked if my characters sometimes surprise me. Yes, they do, and that's a big part of the fun. I will confess that in my second Food Lovers Village mystery, Crime Rib, I had the wrong killer. And this goes back to the point you made about the characters. It turned out that in looking at my characters, the man I thought was the killer would not really have wanted the victim dead. What he wanted was something else. And he was able to get it. Unfortunately, somebody else also wanted the man dead. And so as I looked back in the story, I realized that the real character was there all along. It's always, for me, a question of getting to know the characters and figuring out what they would do to get what they most want. And sometimes they do surprise me. That's a big part of the fun.
No wonder your characters feel so real when I'm reading them. If they can even surprise the author, that's amazing.
That's great.
There's an old line, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to. No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. Some of us, of course, take that more literally than others.
Well, I just finished your newest and so fun Spice Shop Mysteries book in that series, Killing Time. And boy, did I really enjoy it. I liked having really the mystery set in the past. And then sort of as it gets revealed, it also reveals its impacts in the current, in the present. So what is it that inspired your newest, Killing Time?
I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. It was a challenge for me. It arose out of a challenge I set myself. I had wanted to write a book with a cold case in it. And I also wanted to explore Pepper's childhood. And Pepper Reese is the main character who manages a spice shop in Seattle's Pike Place Market. She had an unusual childhood. She grew up in a peace and justice community. She refuses to call it a commune, but it sort of was one. And it was established by her parents and the parents of her best friend, Kristen, on Seattle's Capitol Hill in the early 1970s. It's based on a community that I was aware of and volunteered with much later. But that community that was the basis for my story actually started in the 1970s as well. So these two couples in the story lived in this big old ramshackle house on Capitol Hill, raising their young children and working in the peace and justice community. They started a food bank. They started a meals program at the cathedral and other programs like that. And that sort of thing really was happening, not just in Seattle, but in many cities around the country back then. Well, that's an interesting and unusual way to raise children, especially when there are other people moving in and out of the community. And so I thought, what could go wrong? What about people who were not quite in tune with the same vision that the founding couples had? People who maybe had a little more violent tendencies in their heart. And I thought about what opportunities there would have been for division within the community. And that's where the storyline came from. I don't mean to be vague, but it's always difficult to talk about a mystery and not give away anything. Of course, if you use a cold case, you have to have a modern mystery to open that door and bring it in, and that was a fun challenge. I think I succeeded. I hope so, anyway.
I certainly think that you did. And I really like the way that you sort of weave into your writing so many of those things that you're passionate about in your life, including the locations, like in this case, Seattle, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart. Are the interests that you include, do you feel that they're shared by your readers, or is that something that you're sort of showcasing to them as to see if they would then become interested in those same things? And what kind of feedback are you getting from your readers about that?
It's a little bit of both. I think the two main passions are the locations and the food. One series is set in northwestern Montana, where I live, and the other, as you mentioned, is set in Seattle. It's a lot of fun to introduce people to a side of Montana that they don't expect. People often think of us as cowboy country, as farm and ranch country, and certainly we have that. But we also have some really delightful small towns, and I happen to live in one that I used as the basis for Jewel Bay. It's inevitable every summer to hear people visiting who are just completely astonished by this little town. They did not expect the arts, the music, the food. They expected the recreational opportunities, the mountains, the lakes, and so on, but they didn't expect the arts focus. And so that's been a lot of fun to play with. In the Seattle series, I lived in Seattle for quite a few years. I went to college there and lived there for several years after law school before coming back to Montana. So spending a few hours a day in Seattle is great fun for me. I don't have to worry about the rain, and I don't have to put on shoes.
Nice.
You asked about the reader feedback. I will say that nearly all the readers have shared the delight in discovering this little town in Montana, and they've nearly all enjoyed the introduction to Seattle, or in some cases the reintroduction to Seattle. I will confess there are a couple of Amazon reviews that say things like, if I wanted a travel log, I'd have bought a travel guide. But then I've had readers tell me, I went to the market and the shop you described was right there on the corner, right where you said it would be, and the pizza was just as good as you said it would be. And so that's just really a thrill to me that I've been able to introduce people to a city I truly love, or in many cases take them back there. And if I can make them hungry and want to make the food at the same time, that's even better.
Well, you can put me in the box of loving the way that you bring these locales to life. And my local cozy friends, the cozy fans that I know right here in Seattle, and we talk about how much we love how precise you are. I mean, it's really, like you say, this is exactly where these places are in Seattle. And you really, I think I don't understand the travelogue comment, because we feel like you really capture the personality of the location, almost like the location is a character. I mean, you really capture the personality of Seattle.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It particularly means a lot to me when someone who knows the location likes what I've done with it. Writing a real place, setting a series in a real place presents different challenges than setting one in a place that's partly real and partly made up. I feel a need to be accurate, but yet at the same time, a city is always changing. That's the nature of a city. And one person's experience of it is going to be different from another. And slipping a story into a real place definitely presents some challenges, but I enjoy a challenge.
We enjoy reading it. And the other thing about your books is they include some outright and then also some subtle humor. And I'll tell you right now, my favorite in Killing Time is you have each chapter has a little subheading. And the one that I just love is your cook's motto, I love cooking with wine. Sometimes I even put it in the food.
So good. So good.
Yeah, I've stolen that already. But, but that made me think, is humor really a necessary ingredient for cozies? Or in this case, is it like a spicy optional choice?
You know, most of the cozies that I read and enjoy do have a little bit of that humor. I think it's part of what makes them a comfort read. There is a wide variety available in the mystery and crime fiction world. And sometimes you want something a little grittier, a little darker. Sometimes you want something that's a little closer to comfort food. I've sometimes described the cozy as the mac and cheese of the mystery world, and don't we all want that occasionally? For me, it's kind of a natural thing to put the cozy, to put the humor in there. But it's tricky because you have to be careful to keep the humor where it belongs. Murder is a serious business, and I never want to forget that crimes affect people very deeply, and they affect the community in very deep ways. The focus of a cozy, to me, is the community, whether it's the rural or small town cozy like my Food Lovers Village mysteries, or the urban mystery like the Spice Shop series. The amateur sleuth is investigating alongside law enforcement. They're doing the professional investigation, and that's essential, and I never want to undermine that in the stories, because that's important for restoring the external order. The murder or the crime damages the order, the social order in a community. And the official law enforcement investigation, and I'm sorry, I've gone way off your question onto a tangent here.
No, I think you're right on.
No, that's good.
In my view, that law enforcement official investigation is essential to restore the external order of the community. Where the amateur sleuth fits in is she knows the personalities. She knows the secrets. She can ask questions and make connections that an outsider can't necessarily see. And so her role is essential to restoring the social order of the community. And I think that that's a big part of what draws readers to these books. If we can make them hungry and make them laugh at the same time, even better.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Leslie. That really puts a perspective on it that I hadn't thought about. That's excellent. I noticed that you write in first-person point of view. What challenges do you find with that for a mystery? But also, what advantages do you find?
Well, the classic challenge of first person is that you have to make sure that the story unfolds only as the narrator would see it. You can't ever put in anything that she wouldn't know unless someone tells it to her. And so that's always tricky. But for me, it's kind of a natural point of view. The novel that I'm working on right now is not first person, and it's a little trickier for me. I enjoy that first person perspective. One of the challenges is because I'm writing 2 series in first person, I've got to make sure that Erin Murphy in the Food Lovers Village mysteries doesn't talk or think the same way as Pepper Reese in the Spice Shop series. And so in my notes, in my character sketches for these books, I've actually got lists of words they would say and what they wouldn't say. And I try to remember which woman is which and how she looks at the world, and that affects her sentence structure and how she jokes, how she swears. For example, in cozies, nobody actually swears, and so Aaron says criminy. Pepper says holy parsley or holy margaroli. We have a little bit different language in cozy world, and that goes back to the humor point that you mentioned. The advantage, I think, is that it's easy to connect to the readers. It's as though I'm simply telling them the story.
By the way, I really love the creative ways that Pepper swears.
She refers to someone in one of the books as a pain in the anus, and that always cracks me up.
Going back a little bit to what you said about the mac and cheese comfort food, I love that, of the cozies. That's also something that I'm sort of torn about. The idea that cozy writers and women's mysteries in general are like they're easier to read. I feel like that sort of haunts the genre. Even Hillary Clinton was quoted in New York Magazine, and I do like the idea that she enjoys cozies, but her quote, so it's a little troubling to me. She said that she's into easier things to read. I like a lot of women's authors, novels about women, mysteries where a woman is the protagonist, women's cozy mysteries I find relaxing. Can you comment on this, Leslie? Do you feel like I do? There is depth to these cozy stories.
Absolutely, there is. And certainly there's a range, even within the cozy. There are some that are lighter and perhaps don't touch on social justice issues the way that my Spice Shop series in particular does, and some others. That quote you read from Hillary Clinton is very interesting, and I think that certainly mysteries, especially cozies, are easier to read when you think of some of the security briefings and other challenging things that she's had to read over recent years. I think true. It was
exactly.
Jennifer Weiner, the women's fiction writer, who commented that when women write about family and relationships, it's often dismissed as women's fiction or in mystery as the cozy. But when men write about it, they get Pulitzer nominations for their bravery in dealing with emotions and diving into relationships. The packaging of women's fiction and some mysteries sometimes puts us in a world where we're viewed a little bit differently than a similar book written by a man. I do think that in a way, these books, these cozies in particular, are more inviting and more comforting because it's the world that we as women readers are more familiar with. We live here. We don't have to gird ourselves to deal with people who treat us as outsiders. And although there certainly are some women writing excellent political and military thrillers, generally we're not writing about terrorism and espionage. Generally we're writing about the communities that we live in and what goes on here. You asked about depth. I think there's a lot of depth in that, in dealing with the emotions and the relationships between people. One of the ongoing themes in both my series, but particularly in Food Lovers Village Mysteries, is the mother-daughter relationship. But that also comes out in Killing Time, the third Spice Shop book. That is one of the richest, deepest veins of literature. And I really enjoy diving into that in the Food Lovers Village Mysteries, where Erin and her mother run a business together. In the Spice Shop series, because I've chosen an urban setting, I've also chosen to put a social justice issue in each book. And I suppose that phrase can seem intimidating to some people. On the other hand, I'm a Jesuit-educated lawyer. I can't not talk about things like that. So in Salt and Pepper, it's homelessness. In Guilty as Cinnamon, there's a storyline about abusive marriages. And in Killing Time, as I said, we're going back 30 years into the peace and justice community and some things that were not so just and not so peaceful. Those things are part of life, and they're interesting to write and read about.
Yeah, I like the way that you talk about sort of elevating the community concerns. That I can see the meaningfulness there. Ian McEwan, I'm going to quote him also. He's an English novelist and screenwriter. He once said, "When women stop reading, the novel will be dead." And women are by far the main readers of all fiction categories, and they seem to flock to cozies overwhelmingly compared to men. Is there a kind of cozy that could appeal to men?
That's a really good question. I have learned over the last few years not to discount my male readers. I would say that well over 90% are women, but I participate in a local arts festival in the summer in my small community, and I'm always pleasantly surprised at the men who come looking for the next book in the series, and they enjoy these communities and these characters as well. Most of the protagonists are women. I think if a writer created a really credible male protagonist, perhaps that would bring in more male readers, but there isn't a lot of that yet or currently.
That's an interesting idea for the market to sort of expand. And sort of speaking about the market, there's still so many cozies being published, thank goodness. And the Hallmark Channel and BBC have popularized some series. But also some publishing houses have decided not to renew some series. Do you feel, is the cozy market saturated, or is there room for this growth?
I wish I had a crystal ball that would give me the answer to that question. But not having one, I'll fall back on the lawyer's stock in trade, my personal theory. And that is that the major publisher of cozies for many years was Berkeley Prime Crime, which is a division of Penguin. And they really created the look and the feel of the cozy. Other publishers, Kensington, Midnight Ink, Simon & Schuster, and a few other smaller houses, are major players as well. But it was really Berkeley that drove that. And I think what we have seen in the last couple of years is that Berkeley pushed the edges of the market, putting out quite a lot of titles in 1 month, and they may have overdone it. They may have published too many in a single month, more than the readers could absorb. That's not necessarily a criticism, because that's how you find the limits of your market. You push the edges of it. At the same time, Penguin merged with Random House, and Random House has a little bit different theory and isn't as fond of the paperback original as Penguin always has been. And so we've had a couple of reasons for the cutback there within that major player. It's really encouraging to me that the other major players have picked up a number of these series that haven't been dropped. My Food Lovers Village mysteries, for example, are moving to Midnight Ink. There are a couple of mysteries that have moved from Berkeley Prime Crime to Kensington. Others have moved to a new house, Crooked Lane. And so there are other houses that are stepping in and picking up some of these series, but also encouraging the authors to come up with new series. And I think that we will see continued growth and in the readership, in particular, because mysteries soothe the soul. in a chaotic time. One of the things that people often say about why they read mysteries is that it helps them find order in the world. And we are living in a very loud, noisy, chaotic age. I think that that search for order becomes even more meaningful. And I hope that the search for mac and cheese, as we've put it, will continue as well. I think it will, based on what I've been hearing from readers.
Well, as a cozy reader and cozy writer, that's very heartening for me. Leslie, I was hoping that you might read us a little excerpt from some of your cozy writing.
You bet. And this is the section that you picked. It's a good choice. It's always hard to read from the middle of a book, but I think that readers will quickly hear the voice of Pepper Reese in Killing Time.
Oh, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
My clerk informant had said Detective Washington had a rare private office where he spent his days poring over thick files and consoling distressed relatives. That's part of any detective's job, but for a cold case detective, the days often become years. Not for the first time today, I felt like Sam Spade or Lou Archer. Make that Samantha or Louise. My all-black retail outfit adding a touch of noir. All I lacked was the 1940s fedora. Oh, pooh, Pepper, go home. What an excellent idea. Detective Tracy appeared at my elbow and I jumped, unaware that I'd spoken out loud. I glanced at the number on the nearest office door, then at the card in my hand. He must have just left Washington's office. He put his hand on my elbow, an odd, old-fashioned gesture that might have been chivalrous if we were Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. I wrenched away and shot him a spiky glare. But it's not a good idea to antagonize a detective, or to call attention to yourself in police headquarters. Down, Pepper. I was careful not to speak out loud this time. The recurrence of another murder had dissolved the temporary truce between Detective Tracy and me. Or maybe I was a teensy bit worried about what I might uncover. Nothing in the Idiot's Guide to Private Investigating advised on how to dig up the past without tearing up your own roots. But maybe I should have paid more attention to the section on how to make friends and influence police detectives. Tracy punched the elevator button. After your marriage to an officer and your, shall we say, unfortunate experiences, you should understand murder is not a game. Don't play detective, Pepper. The elevator door opened and I stepped in, thinking, no, that's your job. Chapter 14. Salt is born of the purest of parents, the sun and the sea. Pythagoras. Nothing gets me going like telling me not to do something. I stomped down 4th Avenue, swearing at Detective Tracy in my mind. How dare he send me running off like a dog with her tail between her legs? Why was he so determined to keep me from talking with Detective Washington? I didn't know, but it didn't matter. More than one way to skin a cat. I shuddered. Tortured animal metaphors may be commonplace, but that they were creeping into my own thoughts was a serious sign of stress overload. My stomach rumbled as I neared Ripe. At the base of the black tower dubbed the box the Space Needle came in, a nod to its origins as a bank. Brian Strasberg's law firm had taken over part of our old offices on the 40th floor. But no way was I going to confront a lawyer on an empty stomach. A few months later, my friend Laurel set a toasted tomato, basil, and goat cheese sandwich on a two-top in the corner and sat across from me. Between bites, I filled her in. So, Bonnie knew who you were all along. She took a swig of her lemon Pellegrino. And I didn't have a clue, I said through a mouthful of fabulous flavor. So much for being a natural investigator. That had been Laurel's phrase for me last fall when she urged me to probe the death of a stranger at my shop's front door. My experiences in HR gave me insight into human behavior and honed both perceptions and problem-solving skills. But personnel problems don't involve unearthing old crimes and sifting through clues that might tie them to the present.
Oh, I love that.
Wonderful. That's great. And
Thanks.
Leslie, I have a few questions for you as well.
Great.
I know from looking at Lauren Oberweger's newsletter that you're also a graduate, or should I say a survivor, of Donald Moss's Breakout Novel Intensive workshops in Hood River, Oregon. And I'd best describe those, I guess, as boot camp for serious writers. I attended in April of this year, and I'm wondering, how did that program, so intense and so demanding, influence or change your work?
Julie, I'm glad to know that you enjoyed the Hood River experience, although maybe enjoyed is not the best word for it. It certainly is intense, and I loved it. It changed my writing life, and I hope it will influence yours similarly. Probably the most important things I learned from that were the importance of what Don Moss calls microtension, the small little tensions that need to occur in every interaction and on every page. And the point he makes that the protagonist must drive the story. I attended in April of 2012, and my first novel was in progress at the time. That's Death al Dente. I went with about 60% of a first draft. It was due in August. I came home and started over.
I'm not surprised somehow. Yes.
You know, the story itself didn't change much. I knew my characters. I knew the emotions that drove them. I knew what they wanted and what they would do if they didn't get what they wanted. But I didn't know how to make sure that Erin, the main character, drove the story. She was a little too reactive, a little too responsive. In the first scene, for example, which is a conflict with her and her mother is far more interesting than she was. And once Don pointed that out to me, I was able to see that I was holding her back too much. And I learned to really give her some leeway and let her drive the story. And it's become something that I try really hard to pay a lot of attention to, and I think it's paid off.
Great. Sounds like it had a lasting influence on you.
It has. And, you know, another thing for writers is that workshop creates a community of writers. I met people there and have met online people who weren't in my class but attended later years. And we have become kind of a support system for each other. And it's great because we're all speaking the same language as writers.
I'd so agree. I actually met both of my partners in my crit group as a result of the Breakout Novel Intensive workshop. So
great.
I completely agree with that. Leslie, quite a few of our listeners are both mystery lovers in terms of being readers and also potential mystery writers. Are there other writing programs or workshops that you'd recommend to our mystery writing colleagues?
You know, there are a lot of small workshops that I may not be aware of, but there are three I particularly want to mention. For anyone in the Northeast or willing to go to Boston, there is a terrific conference held every fall called the New England Crime Bake. It's co-sponsored by the Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America chapters of New England, and I got to attend last year. It is a conference, not a workshop, but it is a tremendous weekend. There's a similar event in California every other year called the California Crime Writers Conference, and it's sponsored by the Sisters in Crime and MWA chapters. There's also a conference called the Book Passage Mystery Writers Conference that's held by the Book Passage bookstore outside of San Francisco in July. And it's been many years since I attended, but I got a lot from that as well. Two other things I particularly want to mention. One of you mentioned the Guppies chapter of Sisters in Crime, and that is a chapter that I highly recommend for new and beginning writers. It's primarily online, but the chapter sponsors month-long courses that are subsidized by member dues, and there are some really terrific classes, both on craft and marketing. I would be remiss if I did not mention Sink into Great Writing, which is a one-day event sponsored by Sisters in Crime. It is always held the day before BoucherCon, the World Mystery Convention, and it is the project of the immediate past president, which this year happens to be me. And so on Wednesday, October 11th, I believe, in Toronto, we will be sponsoring this year's Sink into Great Writing Workshop featuring Alexandra Sokoloff, who is a former screenwriter turned novelist, and she will be teaching story structure for novelists, tricks on using screenwriting structure and elements from screenwriting to make our novels stronger and more vivid. And there's information about that on the Sisters in Crime website. It's very affordable. It's only $50 for members. And if you're not a member, why not? Membership itself is only $50.
Great, great. Well, there are a few conferences and programs you mentioned that I'm not familiar with at all, so I'm definitely going to check those out. Now, I know you're also an attorney. I can sort of hear that analytical side to you every so often. And you wrote an award-winning book on courtroom procedure for writers. My question to you, Leslie, is what do you wish other authors who sometimes integrate legal thrillers or courtroom procedure into their books, what do you wish that they would really get right in legal thrillers that they usually fall down on?
Well, it won't surprise you, Julie, to know that I have a list.
Okay.
I call it my top 10 list, but I think I'm actually up to 14 at this point.
Oh my. Okay.
Items. And it's on my website. In fact, I'm going to repost it on my blog today, just because we've been talking about it. And that's lesliebudewitz.com, and it's under the blog tab. And it's really not just in thrillers that some of the most common problems occur, because a legal thread runs through the fictional world. We're often dealing with a crime or the effects of crime, even in fiction that doesn't necessarily cast itself as mystery or crime. Probably the biggest problem is failure to use correct terminology, referring to a district attorney in a jurisdiction where that person is called the county attorney or the county prosecutor, referring to superior court when in one state it might be called district court, in another it might be called something else entirely. So check your terminology. It's really not that hard to find the correct terms, and there are some tips for doing that in the blog post that I mentioned, which is actually a reprint of an article that I wrote in the Writer magazine a few years ago. Probably
Excellent.
The second biggest mistake is misuse of Miranda. And that's kind of complicated. It's not complicated. It's easy. Miranda warnings are only required when there is custodial interrogation. You've got to have both. The person being questioned must be being questioned. There must be interrogation. And they must be in custody. That is not free to leave. So unless you've got those two things, Miranda warnings aren't required. I have read books where the police automatically give a Miranda warning as soon as they make an arrest. I'll tell you, nothing is more sure to shut somebody up than giving them a warning. So why do?
I can imagine.
So those are probably the two most common mistakes I see. The ones that, as you can hear, set my teeth on edge.
Sure, and we'll definitely check out the top 14 now and growing list on your website, so that any of us that are writing legal thrillers or mysteries that have some kind of thread of legality in them will hopefully avoid those top 14 sins. Leslie, I know you've been deeply involved in the Sisters of Crime organization, including board positions and leadership. Can you tell listeners a little bit more about this group and also about the Guppies, which you mentioned briefly before? There may be some people out there that are not familiar with Sisters in Crime and should be.
Sisters in Crime is an international organization, although most of our members are in the United States and Canada. It was founded in 1986, which means we just turned 30, and this is our 30th anniversary year. We're continuing the celebration from this last BoucherCon, the World Mystery Convention, which was held in New Orleans, through until the next convention in Toronto in October. The mission statement currently is to promote the ongoing advancement, recognition, and professional development of women crime writers. And no, I don't have that tattooed inside my wrist, though I probably... The organization was founded by Sarah Paretsky and others, Margaret Marin, Carolyn Hart, Sandra Scapitone, Phyllis Whitney was an original member. And it is primarily for writers these days. About 90% of the members are writers, and about 60% are published in some field. But we certainly welcome readers, librarians, agents, editors, other booksellers, others who are deeply involved and supportive of the mystery world. We have more than 50 chapters around the country and in Canada. And one of our biggest chapters, with over 600, in fact, maybe close to 700 members, is the Guppies. And the Guppies chapter stands for The Great Unpublished. Fortunately, you don't get kicked out once you do get published. It is a tremendous source of support and information. I'm the last original Guppy. We were founded, I think, 20 years ago. And it's just such a great group that I haven't been able to bring myself to leave it because this is my tribe. These are my brothers and sisters in crime. When we started, the problem was finding information about craft and about the business. Now the biggest problem is sorting our way through information because there's so much of it. And that's one of the things that the Guppies does best. It also, as I mentioned earlier, puts on online courses that are tremendous. They might be on plotting, on character development, on creating a business plan, on learning to use Goodreads. There's just a wide variety of classes and subgroups that the Guppies offer. So I highly recommend it for anyone who is serious about pursuing writing and publication but is just getting started, particularly if, like me, you don't have a local chapter of Sisters in Crime or Mystery Writers of America.
Excellent. It sounds like there's just a wealth of benefits out there for even the most novice writer, and all they have to do really is go to the website and take a look and dive in.
Yes,
so,
you must be a member of Sisters in Crime National to join the Guppies chapter.
Okay.
Guppies dues are nominal. I think they're $10.
Wonderful. So it sounds like it's really accessible. And I, as a writer, am always fascinated with other writers' writing process. And so I've got to ask you, Leslie, are you a pantser, a plotter, or a hybrid, a combination of sort of both?
That's always the eternal question, isn't it? Until about a year ago, I'd have said, oh, I'm a planner, definitely a planner. But the last couple of books, including Killing Time, I have not wanted to be completely planned. I always start with the characters. I want to know who my people are. And when I'm writing a series, of course, I already know my location, although I'll add in new businesses and neighborhoods in the Seattle series in particular. And so I've got that base to work from, and then I plan from there. I figure out what my scenario is, what would my people be doing, what would Pepper be doing, what would Tag, her ex-husband, be doing, what's going on in the shop, and I just sort of build it or braid it together from there. I have learned to be comfortable with the fact, and it is a fact, that every book has its own process, and every story unfolds itself in a different way. As I mentioned earlier, when I was writing Crime Rib, which was my second published mystery, the killer changed. When I wrote Guilty as Cinnamon, as I was planning it, this was before I was actually composing the sentences and paragraphs, I realized that I had a different killer there as well. And so there's always a lot of surprise and discovery. That's become a bigger part of the process for me as I've gone along. The book I'm working on right now is Psychological Suspense, a standalone novel, and its process has been different yet. We're on audio, not video, or I would turn the camera to show you the door of my office closet. It's got sticky notes showing a different color for each plot line. I tried to have a different color of marker for the characters, but I got confused, so I couldn't keep that up. I've got two different timelines and different colored sticky notes. They're breadcrumbs rather than a roadmap. They show me where I've been, not where I'm going.
I see. Great. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about your typical writing workday and how you start that book, the first words that you put on the screen?
Well, I'm really excited. I mentioned the work in progress. I actually just put it aside last week and turned my attention to the next Food Lovers Village mystery, which will be the 5th book in that series, and it is set at Christmas. And gosh, it's fun to start a book actually in the season when it's set, because it's kind of challenging sometimes when you're writing a book and you think that it's winter and all of a sudden you stand up and you realize you're wearing shorts. You're going to freeze when you go outside, but it's 90 degrees, so you're okay. Or you're convinced that it's Saturday and in fact it's Tuesday in real life. It just happens to be Saturday on the page. So I'm writing my Christmas book, and I wrote my first 5 pages, 1 page yesterday and 5 more today, and it's really an exciting time. This book is half outlined. I know the end, and I'm not going to tell you the ending because it's something that some of my readers have been looking forward to for quite a while, and I'm excited to work my way towards it. I come from the business world where you get to the office at 8:30 and you leave at 5, and I try to keep that schedule. I try to be on the page by 8:30 and take a lunch break, call my mother at 1 o'clock, she's 91, and work until it's time to go downstairs. And that may include marketing and promotional work in the afternoons. Am I perfect at that? Am I religious at that? No, but I treat this as a job. I will tell you, it's the best job I've ever had.
Great. Oh, that's really a great insight in terms of talking about discipline and showing up every day and being dedicated and committed to what you do on a professional basis.
Julie, can I say something about that? You used the word discipline and mentioned showing up every day, and that's really, really critical. But I also understand that not everyone's lives allows them to do that. I wrote my first 3 books, which are all unpublished, so I guess they're manuscripts, not books. I wrote them all on Fridays, and probably the 3rd one on Thursdays and Fridays, because that was all the time I had available. And if you do that, if that's all you can do, your muse, your creative spirit will understand. And as long as you are consistent about it, as long as you are there on the appointed day, she'll show up and work with you. And so I want to reassure people that if they don't have a life that allows them to write 500 words or 1,000 words or whatever their goal is every day, as long as they're doing it regularly and consistently, then the story will trust you and it will come.
Thank you. Great advice to everybody that's holding down a full-time job or trying to complete a graduate degree and or raise children. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important. Very important. And Leslie, do you have any updates for us in terms of, I know you've updated us on a book that you're working on now, but any local appearances or conference presentations, anything else that you'd like our readers to know about?
Oh, thanks. The newest book is Killing Time, which is the 3rd book in the Spice Shop Mysteries. It came out in October, and it's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and it will very shortly be available in large print as well. The 4th Food Lovers Village mystery, Treble at the Jam Fest, features murder at a jazz festival. That will be out in June. For anyone who is in Southern California, I will be speaking about common mistakes writers make about the law to the Romance Writers of America Orange County chapter on Saturday, January 14th. And I will be both the morning and the afternoon speaker because, as you can tell, once you put a nickel in me, it's hard to get me to close my mouth. So that's the only teaching gig on the books right now.
Okay, wonderful. And as you mentioned before, I think anybody that's writing anything, very often there is a legal thread going through it, whether it's a death in the family and someone's estate or will or probate or tax law or whatever. All of those things tend to filter into so much of fiction and certainly nonfiction as well.
Yes, and this is a chance for me to mention that there are some resources aimed at that on my website, primarily in the blog, which is lesliebudewitz.com/blog. I occasionally will write a column about something that I think a writer needs to know about the law. And it's not about contracts or publishing. It's about using the law in your fiction. So in addition to the book, there are quite a few blog posts that people might enjoy scrolling back through. And as I said, I will make sure that the Common Mistakes article is reposted today.
Thank you. I think we'll all be consulting that very, very soon. I think we'll move ahead to our next segment, and I'm going to talk just very briefly about something that Leslie touched on earlier in our podcast here. The one thing that I'd really like to see more of in mystery fiction, whether it's a cozy, a political thriller, a novel of psychological suspense, is tension. And those of us that are big fans of Donald Moss, and certainly the Breakout Novel Intensive Program, among others, he has an excellent book that I highly recommend called The Fire in Fiction, with an entire chapter on the topic called Tension All the Time. And he proposes that keeping readers enthralled, keeping them turning those pages, is not merely a matter of plot, pacing, dialogue, or even setting. No, actually, it's understanding and using microtension, which Leslie referred to earlier, effectively. And Don defines microtension as the moment-by-moment tension that keeps the reader in a constant state of suspense over what will happen, not in the story, but in the next few seconds. And I'm going to share with you just a couple techniques he mentions in this chapter. One, these are certainly techniques that any writer of mystery suspense can implement. One would be having your narrator ask an impossible question or an unreasonable question, developing an indecisive character, and certainly in recent mystery fiction, we've seen a lot of unreliable narrators recently, making sure one person in a dialogue scene consistently undercuts, disagrees, or challenges the other one. And last, forcing your main character into inner conflict. And I think that's something that a lot of writers really struggle with, is to make that inner conflict deep and meaningful. And inner conflict, according to Don, can arise from morally ambiguous situations or even an earth-shattering change in the character's perception. And as Don said in his book, true tension flows not from the outer actions, but from the inner conflict. And that's really what readers want most. So for writers who are prepared to dive deep beneath the surface, there's a lot to work with right there to bring richness and depth to your writing. And I'm going to turn it over to Wendy here.
Well, I wanted to mention on the appeal for cozies for me. So beyond the blanket, the hot chocolate, and the snoozing cat, the appeal for cozies to me is the characters. I like that they're everyday people and that it's their unique personalities, interests, and work and persistence that equip them to solve the mystery. And I am one of those readers who feels like, yes, that could be me solving it. And I like that the characters care. They care to solve the mystery for the community and for what's right. And I also like reading about the different locations that they live in. There's so much detailed description of the setting woven into the stories by these cozy authors that afterwards I feel like I've actually visited the place when I finish the book. Or with the Spice Shop series, I love all the familiar references to the real Seattle that I know. And Leslie sprinkles those so skillfully throughout. As a series goes on, all those details give me a familiarity that with the next book, I feel like I'm back home again. And as the beloved characters start to realize they have a knack for solving, that's fun too. But as a reader, you can't know these characters as well with just their everyday to-do lists. A reader sees the deeper character dimensions as they sleuth through a murderous, puzzle-solving situation. So that's the big appeal to me. And with each podcast, we like to give book recommendations. So my book recommendation today actually includes an author that has a little bit of mystery about her. So my recommendation, if you like historical cozy mysteries, is a series by Susan Wittig Albert. It's called The Darling Dahlias, or Dahlias. Sorry, my pronunciation. It's set in the fictional town of Darling, Alabama in the 1930s, with all the worries of the Depression. Like Leslie's wonderful location descriptions and references, this series also you get a real feel for the town and the era, and it makes you feel like the setting is its own character. The ladies of the town bond together with their expertise in gardening, cooking, sewing, saving money, making do, and they cheer each other up. And they solve mysteries. So you might ask, what's the mystery around this author? Well, decades ago, she wrote another mystery series that I think many of our listeners have read, and it may have launched them into their love of mysteries. I know that it did that for me. I was an
Me too. Me too.
Yep. I was an avid reader of her Nancy Drew mystery series, which she wrote under the pen name of Carolyn Keene. Leslie, I'm wondering, do you have a book recommendation for our listeners?
I do, and I want to play off what you just said, Wendy, because Julie mentioned our mutual teacher, Don Maas. And some people might not know that there were quite a number of writers who wrote as Carolyn Keene. In addition to Susan Wittig Albert, Don Maas wrote a couple of Nancy Drew books, which was a fun thing to discover when I met him because he's so not Nancy Drew.
Wow,
right.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he didn't mention that. Yeah, he outed himself as Carolyn Keene in my class. In the cozy world, I really admire Barb Ross's Maine Clam Bake series. It is set in Maine in a family-run business, and she really, Barbara Ross really gets the commitment between the cozy reader and the cozy writer. I also want to mention a non-cozy author who I think deserves more recognition than she's gotten and a broader readership, and that's Terry Shames, Shames, who lives in Central or Northern California, but who sets her Samuel Craddock series in Texas, in the ranch country of Texas. Samuel Craddock is a retired police chief who gets involved in local investigations, and he's a really terrific character. The books are spare but strong, beautifully written, and I think that the entire series deserves more attention than it's gotten. The first one is A Killing at Cotton Hill. The second one is The Last Death of Jack Harbin. And there are now 2 or 3 more. And I recommend them highly.
Excellent. And I have a recommendation as well. And this came from a friend at Pacific Northwest Writers Association, Jim Harris, who was a bookseller for 40 years. And he knew that I was interested in military mysteries. So he recommended a series, and the one that I started with first, although it's not the first in the series, is James R. Benn. That's Benn. The Rest is Silence. And it's a historical murder mystery set during World War II in Britain. It's a great mystery, and it's also a meditation on the terrible costs of war. It's part of a series featuring U.S. Army Captain Billy Boyle as a criminal investigator. And the book involves hidden agendas, buried histories, long-simmering grudges, and it's set amidst the genteel haven of English nobility on a wonderful country estate, contrasted with the tragic events of Operation Tiger and D-Day. It's a great read. It has a couple of wonderful surprise cameo appearances by real-life characters that I know our readers and listeners will enjoy, and I highly recommend the whole series. And now it's almost a wrap. That's right, it's almost the holidays, and I know Wendy and I both wanted to wish you all a happy and healthy holiday. And I have one last recommendation for you, something I came across, where a paper company actually asked 5 people whose lives have been touched by violence or cruelty to write what they called letters of peace that reflect their enduring faith in humanity. So you can go to their website and meet the authors, read their letters, and learn more about the power of words. The website is howlifeunfolds, that's all one word, .com/letters of peace, all one word. And I think you'll enjoy it. And for this holiday season, and certainly the tumultuous world we're living in now, it seems like an appropriate thing. Again, best wishes for the holidays. Leslie, anything you'd like to add, or Wendy?
Thanks so much for inviting me to chat with you today. It was a delight. You are both intelligent readers and analysts, and I don't say that just because you like my books. And I've had a great time, so thank you.
We did too. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and happy holidays to all of our listeners, and to you as well.
Take care now.